Imagine what it's like not to have learned how to do something as simple as bathe yourself. Seems ridiculous, right? But many foster youth aren't taught basic self-care practices, like how to manage finances, cook, or do laundry. Teaching life skills to foster youth is an important component in supporting their ability to thrive, and young people themselves are helping to shift the focus back to this. How can we meet foster youth where they are? This is Among Us, a podcast from UCLA's Center for the Transformation of Schools that unpacks the often invisibilized experiences of students. We're closing out this season by hearing from two young people who grew up in foster care and the work they are doing today alongside other young leaders to change outcomes for current and former foster youth. On this episode, CTS Senior Project Scientist Dr. Angela James interviews one of our own, CTS doctoral researcher Demontea Thompson, and later on speaks with California Youth Connection advocate Eve Valdez. Demontea Thompson shares about how he transformed his struggles during foster care into resilience and his passion for investing back into the community that shaped him. Born and raised in Compton, California, Demontea Thompson is a Ph.D. candidate here at the UCLA School of Education and a foster care researcher with CTS. He also runs a nonprofit, Twinspire, with his twin brother that provides financial empowerment, social-emotional support, and life skills to current and former foster youth. Demontea and his twin brother were placed into kinship care at an early age due to poverty and substance abuse in the home, where they were raised by extended family. Growing up, he searched for a sense of belonging, but understood that education was his way out. He thanks the many Black female teachers that encouraged him and became his other mothers, as he refers to them, and discovered opportunities to devote himself to creative pursuits and discover ambition within himself. Let's tune in to Demontea's conversation with Dr. Angela James.
This episode, I have the opportunity to sit with Demontea Thompson, one of the first student researchers I had the opportunity to work with. And your own personal research has kind of focused on the area that reflects your personal story. When did you know that you wanted to dedicate your career and scholarship to foster care and your research and your nonprofit organization? How did all of that get started?
It all started when I was much younger, and I realized going through the school system that my uncle never came to the school. Oftentimes we were missing field trips. He wasn't signing off on field trips. We weren't staying after school. My uncle had some strict rules. And I began to realize that that wasn't the experience for every other student. Some of the other students, their parents were coming to parent-teacher conferences. Their parents were picking them up. And I began to understand that my situation was unique and that there were also other students on the campus in my high school who were experiencing foster care as well. And so I began to think to myself, in what ways do they feel a sense of community when they come to campus? I was trying to, gain a sense of community by acting out. I was a class clown. I was joking around and trying to figure out life in that way while also trying to understand how can I bring more money home back to my uncle to be able to kind of help pay for the bills. So all of this led me to getting involved in acting. I was a part of this theatrical company called The Possibility Project. And we created a musical, in fact, on our lived experiences, rather in foster care, rather going through any type of traumatic experiences or challenging experiences in the inner city. And we brought all of those experiences together, and we were able to create an original musical and sing and act and produce it. And that changed my perspective about how can I be able to channel my talents and skills in a way that can sort of let people know what are the experiences of young people who are in foster care.
Wow. I've known you for the last few years, and I never heard this story. I did not know you were an actor.
I wish I would have continued on that path, but shortly after I finished acting, I wrote a book, an autobiography when I was 18 about my experience in foster care and really trying to encourage other young people to pursue education. There is power in education that if you only allow yourself to be connected to teachers and allow them to push you toward excellence, then you can change the trajectory of not only your life, but the life of those around you. And so I knew the power of education and I gave it a try. And fortunately for the Black women who were teaching at many of the schools that I attended served as other mothers. And they were so strict on me and they believed in me. And as a mentor of mine, he says about his teachers that they believed in me so much that they tricked me into believing in myself.
Now, that is the power of education and the power of relationships in education. You know, I'm interested to know more about the book, but I'm also interested to know more about the development of Twinspire, the organization that you founded.
Twinspire came out of the need of our peers. We acknowledged as we got older and we started speaking about our experience in foster care, other folk began to become more passionate about their identity as a current or former foster youth. I think it was during that time where we began to kind of shift the narrative about, woe is me, you know, I don't have parents like my other peers, but whoa, look how strong I am. I've been able to navigate and get this far without the same supports that many of my peers have. Imagine what I can do with the right people in my life, with supportive adults.
That sounds like an important shift.
It was a huge shift. Shortly after high school, we went on to Cal State Northridge. And while at Cal State Northridge, many of our peers, you know, had financial aid and support and cars. And, you know, we saved our money up and was able to kind of get an automobile and was able to navigate life with supports of each other. And we went back to our community and community started saying, oh, y'all think y'all better than us. And we began to realize that there was this difference between the way that we were navigating higher education and being able to kind of come back in our community and say, hey, this is something that can be accessible for us all. And here's how it can change our lives. And we started going to churches, community organizations, and other programs. We went to the projects and was just sharing our testimony, sharing our story.
Know, I want to interject just a little bit. You keep saying we.
My twin brother and I.
One of the things that we didn't explain about this organization is that you co-founded with your twin brother.
Yeah. My brother, while we were at Cal State Northridge, he majored in finance. I majored in business management. You know, I always thought that we would start a company together, that we would, you know, become millionaires and build some type of product. And I think as we went through Cal State Northridge and we began sharing our story, we began to see the need for us to sort of change the narrative about foster youth, especially about Black male foster youth in particular. And so we said, we need to start something. Many people came up to us and said, I'm inspired by these twins. And we said, Twinspire. That's our name. Together we inspire.
I love it.
We've been providing life skills training ever since, financial empowerment, social and emotional learning, and other life skills to schools, to communities, to churches. And we're blowing up now. We just hired our first full-time program director.
That's really fantastic. Tell me, what is most exciting about the future for Twinspire and what you hope to accomplish?
We don't do this work to be glorified or to get awards. We really do this work because we have this strong sense of connection to the people that we see who are in the similar struggles that we've come from. I think young people respect that and they see that. We've gotten to a place now that we're partnering and we're developing contracts with other organizations where we're growing so much that it's going to take us to really get some other team members on board. And so our vision is to be able to hire other current and former foster youth to go out and then be able to present life skills workshops and trainings as well. So we're building this sort of coalition of young people who have a lived experience, who understand what it's like to be in the struggles, to eat top ramen when you ain't got nothing else left, right? To be thinking about, you know, how can I strategize to get more money? How can I, you know, cut costs? Who do I need to call? And I think those things right there really inspire me into thinking about how do we meet the basic needs of young people? We need to be thinking about what type of relationships do this young person have in their lives, right? Are they being fed? Do they have a community surrounding them and supporting them on their goals and visions for life? And what are their goals and visions for life?
Well, I tell you, Demontea, you're a young leader who inspires me. As I think about you and your twin and others, I just want to invite you to think with me about how young leaders are impacting the foster care reform movement. What do you want to do with that? Like, where do you want to go next in terms of how to impact the overarching system?
I think for Twinspire, there's this challenge that when we started the organization, it was to meet the needs of current and former foster youth. And now we're leaning into working with other young people who are, as Kenya Whitman, another researcher, would call Black foster youth, are on the margins of the margins. I agree with that. And I also would like to say that there are young people who are just one call away from an open foster care case. And I believe that those young people are, susceptible to many of the harms and sort of negative outcomes that come with having an open case in DCFS. And so for us, we've been able to help other young people who come from marginalized backgrounds. And I actually see us having a location and being able to do preventative services, right? Actually being a hub in collaboration with other nonprofit organizations, like larger organizations such as Children's Institute, and then being in partnership with United Friends of the Children, and being able to sort of have a one-stop shop when families are in need, that they can go to organizations and community members, community orgs, and say, hey, I'm struggling with these things. How can I get some support before they get a call from DCFS? We're saying there are young people who are struggling now. And in that struggle, they need these supports to be able to navigate life. And so this is where our services come in. I also want to say on one end, there's reform, and on the other end, there's abolition. And so there's a movement that's been sort of in place. And I believe Alan Detlef and many other scholars are behind. Dorothy Roberts are calling for the abolition of foster care because of the disproportionate rates of Black youth who are entering foster care. Not only that, the unsuccessful sort of resolutions to reunifying children, and then the harm that children face while they're in care, such as group homes, and the abuse that they experience when they're in foster care. And so there's this huge call for abolition, and they're asking for more of transformative justice practices. Yes. And that's essentially what we're providing. We're providing those relationships, the mentorship, and really being sort of a hub for healing and centering the youth experiences, so that way they can be able to stay united within their families and stay whole and healthy within their families, rather than being taken away and place the child with someone else and pay another family for taking care of that child.
When we could better support the families themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a really, really important point to make. Throughout this podcast season, we've had a lot of folks on, and we've been hearing a lot of perspectives on how to improve and how to change the foster care system. From your perspective, what are the top 3 things we need to do to better support students with foster care experience?
I think the first thing would be understanding the perspectives and lived experience of youth in foster care. I think oftentimes researchers think that they get it right because they're using data to be able to understand the GPAs and the negative outcomes and the deficits of young people. But I think hearing from the young people and allowing them to be a part of the research process allows them to make sense and meaning of their experiences. And then they'll be able to sort of allow researchers to see that what they care about and what counts for them is sometimes on the contrary of what researchers care about and what policymakers care about and what they need to be able to make, these large decisions on reform and care for young people. For example, absenteeism. We're talking about the ways in which that we can get foster youth to attend school, just show up, right? We're not talking about food insecurity. We're not talking about wealth building and being able to navigate health and mental health concerns. And so I think without adding all of the pieces to the puzzle, we miss the bigger picture.
Yeah.
But these are the sort of three things that come to mind. The first is a nationwide database. And we mentioned this too in our report on the CSU system-wide report that we did with the Center for the Transformation of Schools. And I believe that there should be a similar database for K through 12 entirely, not just high school, K through 12 entirely, to be able to understand which of the young people who are in foster care, who are falling through the cracks, which students need the most support, and how can we sort of navigate to be able to create interventions such as programs like Twinspire or other orgs who are in the community to show up and be responsive to the needs of students. The second thing is providing support such as mental health services and basic needs and financial support to families. We cannot say that young people, they can succeed, they can come to school, they can have a good life if we're not supporting the families themselves.
Right.
We can see from the data that across all success indicators that foster youth, oftentimes foster youth who are Black, are not faring well based on their peers. There's much more that we can do as it pertains to ensuring that community school grants, ensuring that other grants and other programs, more counselors are available at schools to be able to support foster youth intentionally and holistically. And then the last thing I would say is increasing the funding for supports of young people in these schools. The governor has made some great strides.
Governor of California,
Gavin Newsom. He's made some great strides, but now we're in a deficit, and I think that we can do better in making sure that these funds are allocated, are mandated, to be able to support these young people.
The needs of young people don't reduce because of the budget deficit. In fact, they probably increase. Thank you for yourself, your testimony, Twinspire, and your inspirational presence.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Demontea expresses how we must meet the basic needs of our young people on the margins of the margins who need a comprehensive support system to not just navigate life, but thrive and explore their full human potential, especially when they are about to transition out of care. Coming up next, we hear from Eve Valdez, who talks about her own hardships growing up in Pomona, California, a teacher who took her in from the streets and helped her to get back on her feet, and how her lived experiences led to her current work as a foster care advocate. The UCLA Center for the Transformation of Schools partners with the education ecosystem to change school systems through research, practice, and policy to support more equitable outcomes for historically underserved students. We'd love to keep the conversation going with you. You can reach us at ctschools@ucla.edu. Among Us is sponsored by the Stewart Foundation, a family foundation dedicated to improving life outcomes for young people through education. By partnering with exceptional and important organizations, CTS is committed to promoting change in our schools.
My name is Sophie Finelli. I'm the president at the Stewart Foundation. If you care about young people and youth, don't silo your work, right? Take a bigger view. Ask yourself, what are the conditions for the most marginalized of young people in our system? And often this set of questions will lead you to talking to young people who've experienced the foster care system. And if you listen to them, you'll understand that equity is not a zero-sum game, right? That you can actually, by focusing deeply on young people who experience foster care system, you're going to find solutions that are going to be impactful for every marginalized young people and frankly for every young person. Center these young people, listen to their experience, hire the right staff who understand deeply what these systems create and how we can change them together.
Eve Valdez is a chapter member of California Youth Connection, a youth-led organization that engages young leaders to transform foster care and its intersecting systems. Every chapter member has lived experience and is advocating on behalf of system-impacted young people through community-led organizing, legislative, policy, and practice change. Eve's specific area of focus is kinship care. Many foster youth who are placed with relatives are not able to access grants, transitional housing, and other critical supports. Eve is working to change this. Eve faced extreme challenges growing up in foster care. She did not go to school until she was in the 4th grade, which led to delays in critical developments like speech. With the help of a caring adult, she was able to catch up socially, emotionally, and academically, and even went on to take advanced placement courses in high school. Let's turn to Dr. Angela James's conversation with Eve Valdez.
Welcome to our podcast, Eve. California Youth Connection is such an important force advocating and building power among youth with lived experience in the foster system. And I'm a huge admirer of your organization.
Thank you guys for having me on here. My name is Eve Valdez. I'm a former foster youth, so I have a lot of lived experience I'm excited that we get into today.
Tell us about how your experience translates into the work that you're doing.
So CYC works a lot on advocacy, legislative work, policy work, a lot of advocating for change in the foster system. We bring our lived experience and we use them to kind of form what type of changes or what type of advocacy work that we can start working on with the foster system that is current.
Right. And so in terms of your own experience, how did that shape what concerns were interesting to you and important to you? What kind of things are you tackling?
Right now, my passion is kin gap. And so that's the type of placement I was in. And so kin gap or kin care is where you're placed with a relative. And so because of that, there's actually less benefits for people in that type of placement. And so because of that, we don't get access to the Chafee grant. We don't get access to SILP. We don't get access to THP Plus, so we don't get access to any of those resources. We actually don't have an ILP worker. We don't have a CASAS worker. We don't have any of those resources. It's just kind of like hands off, like, oh, you're with the relative, bye, you know? And so there was a lot of cracks having that happen because I didn't get the adequate care that I needed. You know, I had severe trauma. I was malnourished. When I moved in with my grandma in 4th grade, I had to learn how to shower. I had to do speech therapy. I didn't start school until 4th grade. And so the assistant just pretty much was like, here, you know, take her, you know, and that's it. My grandma, who's old school, she didn't know how to take care of somebody, you know, with that much trauma. It was really frustrating for her to come. And my sister ended up developing schizophrenia. And so she had to deal with all of these, like, you know, kids, and it was actually really hard for her to go through.
Right. That's a lot. And with much fewer resources for you or for her.
Yes.
Oh, wow. And so in terms of your work with CYC, advocating for the rights of youth and for caregivers, really, support for caregivers is really important.
Yes.
You know, I want to talk a little bit more about youth voice and the importance of, in particular, people with lived experience. So can we talk a little bit about what you bring into decision-making spaces and why it's so important to listen to voices such as yours, people who have the actual experience?
Yeah, I think like for one of them, the best example I can give you with decision-making is with Medi-Cal. And so one of the things that happens with former foster youth is that we get Medi-Cal until we're 26. But in reality, what we're dealing with is a severe mental health problems. You know, so it's kind of like they're giving us basically therapists who are still getting their hours. And so they're not specialists in trauma that we have experienced and are experiencing. You know, how it looks on the outside is they get free Medi-Cal until they're 26, you know, but on the inside it's like, I'm dying here, you know, like I've had like probably like 20 therapists, like they all move on after they get their hours, you know, and they're not specialized in the type of disorders that I have. And like, you know, they're unexperienced and they're not familiar with what type of behaviors like comes out of having these type of, you know, mental health disorders. So if they weren't listening, and then also that you just get talk therapy. A lot of foster youth don't like talk therapy, you know, they want other ways to express themselves. So I think that that's why it's really important to involve those youth voices and really hear what specialized needs that they have, because what they're going through isn't what every other kid is going through. Like they've been through severe trauma.
Absolutely. And, you know, when you talk earlier about starting school in 4th grade, I'm just really curious. We're as we mentioned, with the Center for Transformation of Schools. So schools is a kind of a big deal for us. And I can't resist asking you to talk a bit more about your educational experiences and what that was like starting school in the fourth grade and how you navigated that process.
It was so frustrating. Like, I didn't understand why people even had to go to school because I wasn't used to it. I didn't know what it was for. Like, I didn't know the importance of it. So I was so confused. And then I had to go to speech therapy. That's how underdeveloped I was. I was barely even learning how to talk. I was barely learning how to shower. I was barely learning how to eat properly and stuff. And then I have to go and I have to like sit in the classroom, and I was always getting in trouble because all I knew was just like do whatever I wanted, because growing up with my mom, before we got taken away, it was just, moving around from hotels to hotels or, this place to that place. We never could go to school because we had so much lice in our hair. So that was one of the reasons. And so it was just like, doing whatever we wanted every day. And so I got bullied all the time because I was always getting in trouble. And even when, got to middle school and to high school, like all the other kids would get so annoyed with me because I was never paying attention and stuff. And when I hit the streets when I was in high school, I wanted to go back to school and I wanted to get off the streets, and so I found this lady at this church who was willing to take me in. She happened to be a math teacher, and she taught me how to study and she taught me how to learn. So I ended up getting on the honor roll, and I was in AP classes.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I just needed that consistency.
Wow. I was going to ask you about, teachers or administrators and what they may have done. So you just happened to meet this person.
Yeah, I was on the streets for so long because my grandma kicked me out when I was 13 for self-harming. But it was summertime. It was hot. So I went to this church and I asked, I was like, hey, I really want to go back to school. Like, I really want to live somewhere. And so this lady took me in. Her name's Jocelyn Perry. And she taught me everything.
Bless you, Jocelyn Perry.
Yes.
That's a wonderful, wonderful story of community and of teachers who take their lives as teachers seriously in and outside the schoolyard. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, she's great.
I want to ask you about what could have been done differently in terms of the systems and as multiple systems, the foster care system, but also the educational system. What could have been done differently, in your opinion, that would have made educational experiences more supportive for you?
I think that it's all about like the teachers, because if you look at my transcripts, like the places where I got good grades is the teachers where I connected with the most. They knew about my situation, so they would give me food, like they would help me with clothes and everything. Like I actually graduated high school early, and the school I graduated early from, they would give me blankets, they would give me food, they would give me everything. But I think it's all about like them actually nurturing you as a person and not just seeing you as an enrollment, but actually taking care of the student holistically.
Right. Well, Eve, I tell you, there's no better example of what we say all the time, which is relationships, relationships, relationships. They just matter. And so when you had relationships, when people saw you as a whole person, not just a sliver of a person in math class or in English class, but a whole person, you were able to not only succeed, but excel, it sounds like. I'm amazed. AP Math, that's awesome.
Well, AP History, but...
AP History, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The math teacher, but you end up in AP History.
Yeah.
Whichever way it happened, this is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Youth voice is so important in decision making because people with the experiences, people closest to what has happened to them, usually have a better notion of where the gaps are than people outside of it. So can you just talk a little bit about some of the experiences you've had with your organization and where that youth voice becomes pivotal?
I think for one thing, it was the Chafee grant. Like a lot of people were just very grateful that it was out there, but there's a lot of cracks where it's like if you grew up in Kin Gap, then you don't apply.
Well, tell us a little bit about the Chafee grant.
So the Chafee grant is where you get $5,000 a year for going to school for whatever needs that you have. And so only people who grew up like in random homes and not with their relatives, they qualify for that. But if you got taken away and put with your caregiver, with your relative, then you don't qualify for the Chafee grant. So that's when we come in like, hey, like I was homeless the entire time, you know what I mean? these people living with all these, rich foster people and stuff.
They have access and you
Yeah,
didn't.
like, I'm
Wow.
living in the streets of Pomona, like, with no, like, family members, with no friends, no support, no nothing, you know what I mean? And I
Hmm.
don't even get the Chafee grant, I don't get transitional housing, I don't qualify for
Hmm.
anything because they relied on my grandma to take care of me, but they didn't even
Right,
give my grandma any support to take care of me either, you know? So
right,
that's when the
right.
youth voices come in and just say, "Hey, you can't be giving us to our relatives without any support because what we're going through is severe trauma and we do need extra help."
Absolutely. And so, that brings something up I want to talk about. A lot of people talk about reform and other people talk about abolition. Tell us about your position with some of those things and how you bring that into the work and into our lives.
Yeah, so we're an advocate for reforming the foster care system. I feel like if we abolish the foster care system, then I still hear a lot of stories of my friends who have never been taken away. And so they've just
Hmm.
had to grow up in that toxic home. And I don't think that's fair either.
Hmm.
I do think that they should get the opportunity to get moved to somewhere that is healthier. But at the same time, advocacy for how we reform the foster care system is making it healthier than where we were before.
Right. So making sure that resources to the child, no matter whether that child is placed with people they don't know or people that are related to them, but making sure that whatever resources they need, they receive. And the families need resources, is what I'm
Yes.
hearing.
Yes, absolutely. My grandma needed so much support. And when I was younger, I was so mad at her for always because I would get in trouble for crying. I would get in trouble for like being sad, like, because she thought, like,
Hmm.
now you have a house, now you have food, like, why are you so miserable and stuff? You know what I
Right.
mean? And I would get mad at her, like, what type of person gets mad at? But in her mind, she was like this old lady who was super frustrated trying to give us the world, and
Hmm.
she still saw that we were severely depressed. But if she had someone to educate her on mental
Right.
health, it wasn't until my sister developed schizophrenia to where she was like, "Oh wait, this is real." Like,
Yeah.
this actually does have an
Hmm.
effect on the brain and stuff. And so I think that if she had more support, especially if there was no disruptions in the services, so if there was a ILP worker working with her so that way she didn't have to kick me out, so that way I could
Hmm.
still get the services that I needed, that my grandma also got the services that she needed, there wouldn't been any disruptions in that services. There wouldn't be any disruptions in housing because there would have been someone consistently checking up on us. But with
Right.
Kinga, we don't have that.
Is there anything in particular you want our listeners to know or to understand about foster care as a system and about youth with lived experience in the foster care system? Anything at all?
I think that there's so much that can come out of fostering a foster youth, and the support that you put in to people who have a lot of lived experience is beneficial because they're more resilient and they're more capable of going above and beyond. There's so many success stories of people who have dealt with so much trauma and just seeing the outcome, the things that they were able to accomplish. Because a lot of
Hmm.
people are like, why should we put so much if they're just going to be drug addicts and they're just going to be this and they're just going to be
Hmm.
that. And they put so much stigmas on people who have grown up in these type of environments, but the benefits to actually fostering and loving and building a community around them is because of what they're able to accomplish, and it's amazing.
And I will say, without hesitation, you are amazing. I thank you so deeply for sharing your story with us. And I am incredibly excited about, what you've done for yourself as a self-advocate
Thank
at
you.
every step. And I feel happy and more secure for people that come behind you because you are there to help them advocate for themselves and as well to continue advocating for people with circumstances such as yours. And that's just fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today's conversations give us a lot to think about. We need to prioritize the input of youth with lived experience, allowing them to be a part of the change process while making sense of their own experiences, the good and the bad. Teachers and administrators, in many ways, can be a make or break for foster students' experience in school. Awareness of student situations, building genuine connections, and curating holistic care will benefit foster youth. Eve was punished for acting out in school, which was really a cry for help. She said in her conversation with Angela, You don't know what your students are dealing with at home, or if they have somewhere to call home. Eve wants to make resources like the Chafee Grant available to all foster youth. Currently, this grant has limited qualifications and needs to be expanded to include foster youth living with relatives, which doesn't automatically ensure that a young person is in a safe, caring home. Also, more education for foster families, like around mental health, could prevent a family from perpetuating further trauma. Eve urges us to focus on how can we make the foster care system safe and healthy. Being a mentor can help foster youth learn basic skills like cooking and laundry, to lessons around finance and finding affordable housing. For our listeners who are hiring managers or landlords, consider prioritizing job listings and housing opportunities for foster youth and making this clear in applications. In academia, we have some work to do. Data on things like absenteeism, suspensions, test scores, and graduation rates does not include all the pieces to the puzzle. We're not looking at data on things like food insecurity, financial literacy, well-being, and mental health. For schools, we need to increase funding for foster youth supports as an investment in our students. We also need a nationwide K-12 database of foster youth in order to clearly identify students who need more support and provide interventions through schools. Looking back at this past season, we've heard from a range of perspectives that have really enlightened us to the varied and dynamic experiences of foster care. Some resounding themes have come up across the conversations. First, young people's involvement in the foster care system is not random. Racism and socioeconomic disparities shape foster care involvement. Discrimination and economic inequality are both reflected in and actively shape our foster care system, which means that youth in foster care are more likely to be Black or Brown, have experienced poverty, or otherwise be marginalized. Addressing these factors is key in improving care provided through the system, as well as preventing many children from ever entering it in the first place. Second, we need to listen to young people with lived experience and include their perspectives and input into our legislation, policies, and practices. No one knows better how we can improve foster care than someone who lived the system themselves. Cross-systems collaborations and partnerships are key to mitigating gaps in support for foster youth and coming up with innovative solutions, like some of the examples that Sixto from episode 2 and Jamie from episode 5 and others uplifted. Foster youth need customized supports at different phases throughout their journey, including during K-12, during college, and as they are aging out of the system in their mid-20s. Too many foster youth are left to navigate life on their own as young adults with little to no support to do so, impeding them from thriving. And lastly, we cannot ignore the unique traumas that foster youth have experienced due to family separation, poverty and lacking access to basic needs, exposure to abuse, neglect and addiction, interruptions to their schooling, stigmatization, and other factors. Mental health, social, and emotional supports are paramount for these young people, and we cannot underestimate the power of a caring, committed adult for foster youth and supportive peer relationships with others who have experienced similar hardships. So, what's next? At CTS, we know that our engagement with this work is not finished. We have some forthcoming studies on foster youth, and stay tuned for future podcast seasons on students furthest from opportunity. Eve said it best. The young people who have experienced the most hardships have developed resilience and have the ability to achieve much if we can support them along the way to do so. Thank you so much for joining me this season. Until next time. This is Among Us. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Geneva Sum. Among Us is a podcast by the Center for the Transformation of Schools in the School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA. Caitlin McAloon is the production coordinator. Elizabeth Wyndham is the supervising producer, and Julia Wyndham is the editor. The senior producer is Jay Woodward. Our theme music is Pillar by Shimmer. For more information about this week's episode, go to transformschools.ucla.edu. You can find all of our links in our show notes. If you have any questions or feedback for us, email us at ctschools@ucla.edu. And please follow, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Among Us is produced by Windhaven Productions and Blue Jay Atlantic.